It's Wednesday, August 13th, 2008, and it's 4:20 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about our show at our website, stash.norml.org, and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. For your professional web design needs, visit redaphid.com. Welcome to Hemp Day Hump Day, dear Stashers. Glad to have you here. Sorry for the late post. We're getting ready for Hemp Fest, just 3 days away, and boy, I've got so much I've got to prepare. I've got to get some cuts ready for my radio show that I'll be putting on a repeat this week. So got those that I'm putting together, and of course videos for the TV show that's also this weekend. So sorry about being a little behind the time here, but better late than never, right? Today's our Cannabis Science Day. Of course, we have Dr. Mitch Earlywine from State University of New York at Albany joining us, and he's going to talk about some studies on pot etiquette. Yes, they pay people to study pot etiquette. Can you believe that? Also, I've got an interview with Bernd de Busman, who's a columnist for Reuters, who published a very, very good column examining the futility of marijuana prohibition, and I'll be discussing that with him. Also, we've got your regular musical break for you and all the hemp headlines, so stay tuned and enjoy. Roll me another one, just like the other one. It's time for your NORML Daily Audio Stash. Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our NORML Daily Audio Stash, Hemp Headlines. Newly published U.S. military research demonstrates that hemp foods don't contain significant amounts of the drug THC. As part of an initiative to examine the legitimacy of legal arguments by military personnel that fail marijuana drug tests but claim they encountered intoxicating tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, via the legal ingestion of hemp products, the U.S. military directed laboratory testing of a wide variety of hemp food and cosmetic products. The findings of the new research, published in the July-August 2008 Journal of Analytical Toxicology, indicate that not only do hemp products in the marketplace not contain hemp at levels that would cause intoxication or failed drug tests, the vast majority of the tests did not detect any THC. While this new data will help government prosecutors in court prove that the defendants obtained THC from marijuana and not hemp, it confounds a decades-long government initiative to prevent commerce of hemp products and to ban hemp agriculture in the U.S. under the misguided drug war campaign that tried to construe hemp as the same as marijuana. On February 6, 2004, the Hemp Industries Association won its 2.5-year-old lawsuit against the Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA. The unanimous decision by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit permanently blocks DEA regulations that attempted to ban nutritious hemp foods such as waffles, breads, cereals, vegetarian burgers, protein powders, non-dairy beverages, salad dressings, and nutrition bars. These are the types of products that were analyzed as part of the government research. Hemp protein powder and shelled hemp seed by Manitoba Harvest, Hemp Foods and Oils, were among the hemp foods tested and found to have non-detectable levels of THC. Mike Fatah, president and co-founder of Manitoba Harvest, said, quote, "It is frustrating that one agency of the U.S. government continues to wage a war against industrial hemp, claiming that it's the same as marijuana. And yet at the same time, they are doing research demonstrating how it does not contain significant levels of THC, and therefore noting that military personnel can't reasonably claim that hemp foods caused a failed drug test." End quote. I used to think it was ironic that the Drug Enforcement Administration was in charge of prohibiting something that is not a drug. Then I remembered that we have a Defense Department that frequently goes on the offense and an Interior Department in charge of the great outdoors. If there is one upside to high gas prices and the coming of peak oil, it is that the world will be forced to turn to hemp for its fuels and products currently based on petrochemicals. Indiana company formed to improve marijuana detection. Two Purdue University researchers have joined with a Northern Indiana biotechnology firm to launch a company to improve marijuana's detection in a person's system. Intellimune LLC will focus on developing a more reliable and accurate diagnostic tool for testing the presence of tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, said Fred Regnier, Purdue's John H. Law Distinguished Professor of Analytical Chemistry. Jiria Demick, research assistant professor at Bindley, said the current test for THC is based on unstable antibodies and fraught with problems. Intellimune researchers hope to devise a process that's much more precise and reliable. Adamick said, quote, "Law enforcement can use breathalyzers to determine whether a person is above the legal limit for alcohol use, and saliva is used to detect the presence of marijuana or THC in a person's system, but that test isn't reliable. We look to deliver a proven process that will vastly improve on the present-day test for marijuana." End quote. Adamick, who will serve as technical officer for Intellimune, said the process being developed by the company is also a saliva test, but it will not use protein-based antibodies. Instead, he said, it will employ a process known as molecular imprinting, in which an artificial antibody is used to capture THC. Results from this process also would be available in about 5 minutes, which is comparable to existing diagnostic tools. For me, this is one sticky issue to cover. NORML has always called for the responsible use of marijuana by adults, and most certainly driving while impaired by cannabis is not responsible use. NORML has also opposed marijuana drug testing for impairment because testing for metabolites only proves prior use, not current intoxication. However, from a political standpoint, a marijuana test that does accurately measure current intoxication presents some advantage. It might be easier to win votes for marijuana decriminalization or taxation and regulation if the public felt safer because there was an accurate way to catch DUIs. The problems I see are these: setting a baseline legal limit on THC that would have nothing to do with impairment. What if you've smoked, waited 2 hours, then drove, but tested positive? Were you impaired? I guess the same argument could be made for alcohol. Some people at 0.08 are truly wrecks waiting to happen, but an alcoholic with a tolerance can drive quite functionally at 0.20. As a society, though, we set 0.08 in most places as the legal limit, figuring that enough people would be wasted at that point to justify the limit. So where do you set that limit with weed? Especially considering that many studies show marijuana-intoxicated drivers to be safer than alcohol-intoxicated drivers. And what about medical marijuana patients? Are we condemning them to a life without driving privileges? Marijuana law changes sought in Mendocino County. From the Ukiah Daily Journal. In the wake of a victory at the ballot box, the Yes on B coalition petitioned the Mendocino County Board of Supervisors Tuesday to amend an existing ordinance to make nuisance charges against marijuana growers criminal matters rather than civil ones. The existing ordinance declares anyone growing more than 25 marijuana plants a public nuisance, as well as any cultivation within 1,000 feet of a school. Prosecution is handled through civil action, either by neighbors or a code enforcement officer. Speaking for the coalition, Ukiah resident Larry Puterbaugh asked the board to amend the ordinance to classify any marijuana that can be seen or scented from properties adjoining the grow a nuisance and make violations of the ordinance punishable as criminal misdemeanors. Pewter Boss said, quote, "Public health and safety requires that marijuana should be grown only where others can't see it and can't smell it," end quote. To pay for the enforcement of these new ordinances, the coalition proposed a medical marijuana impact fee, which would be levied against legitimate growers of medical marijuana on a per-plant basis, and would require that all medical marijuana plants be tagged with a numbered zip tie. Failure to purchase zip ties would be treated as a violation under the ordinance. Jeanette Bogue said making the visibility of legitimate medical marijuana a crime is absurd because it doesn't take into account basic facts. Bogue said she grows medical marijuana behind her home in a greenhouse behind a fence, but noted that both of her neighbors have two-story houses and would be able to see over her fence from the second floor of their homes, regardless of where the garden is planted. Bogue said the proposal would force medical marijuana patients to participate in the medical marijuana identification card and zip tie programs, both of which are currently voluntary. I'm still struggling to figure out how seeing or smelling a legal medical marijuana plant is a danger to public health and safety. These drug warriors are so brainwashed to the idea of a plant being evil that they can't even stand the sight or smell of it. I'm also wondering how the marijuana zip tie system's gonna work. If I begin my garden with 25 little clones, and I purchase 25 little zip ties, and then 10 of those plants fail, do I get to keep the zip ties and use them on a future crop? Oh, and has anyone in Ukiah taken into account how many medical marijuana patients live within 1,000 feet of a school? Any cultivation within 1,000 feet of a school is going to be punishable as a criminal misdemeanor. I've got a picture of Ukiah, California up on the blog at stash.normal.org that locates all of the schools and indicates the zones of 1,000 feet within that school. If you're a patient and you want to grow your own little pot plant, you can live anywhere on that picture that isn't covered in red. Micah Dangle from the Students for Sensible Drug Policy has infiltrated the DARE conference. He sent us an email saying that he's currently in San Antonio, Texas, covertly representing SSDP at the DARE conference. The goal is to keep a low profile so as to film as much as possible the first couple of days, and then be a little more direct in my questioning and motives on the last day of the conference. As you can imagine, it was hard to hold my tongue today when a presenter relabeled harm reduction harm promotion and claimed that it made as much sense as teaching your kid to shoplift responsibly. If you'd like to follow my adventures over the next few days, check out the SSDP blog, daregeneration.blogspot.com. Check it out and give Mike a comment or two out there at that blog. That's great work he's doing infiltrating the DARE conference.
Hello, I'm Paul Stanford from the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, or THCF. Medical marijuana is legal in 12 states today, and THCF has medical clinics in 6 of those states. Our physicians help qualified patients obtain an authorization for medical marijuana in their state. Patients are eligible for medical marijuana with a history of either severe chronic pain and or nausea, cancer, AIDS or HIV, hepatitis, glaucoma, seizure disorders like epilepsy, chronic muscle spasms as in multiple sclerosis or asthma, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, and gastrointestinal disorders like IBS or Crohn's disease. If you or someone you know has one of these conditions, our doctors will help them obtain a permit for medical marijuana. THCF Medical Clinics has offices in Washington State, Oregon, Colorado, Nevada, Hawaii, and California. Call 1-800-723-0188 or go to the web at www.hemp.org or 1-800-723-0188.
Who is telling you the truth about marijuana? The government? Scientists? Doctors? Which claims are scientifically valid and which claims are reefer madness? Every Wednesday we separate the stems of propaganda from the buds of truth with NORML's look at cannabis science. Well, every week we get to study a little bit of this cannabis science, and it's always fun to talk with Dr. Mitch Earlywine on this subject. This latest study you sent me, Dr. Earlywine, I found this one to be quite interesting. It's a study on pot etiquette. I mean, you guys really get paid to study puff, puff, pass?
Indeed, this is a federally funded research project looking at how basically, different legal sanctions may have contributed to the way people use cannabis in public settings. But I also like some of the caveats here about pot etiquette, and I think puff puff pass is exactly a good, little rule of thumb that didn't show up in these data, but has become kind of its own cultural icon.
Well, what did they find when they discovered the pot etiquette? How do the criminal laws on marijuana affect the way people interact with it?
Well, this is neat because this builds on some work that Craig Reinerman has done, and basically suggesting that, people develop their own sort of social sanctions when people kind of violate pot etiquette, and some of these etiquettes have to do with, keeping things private, maintaining your own space when you're going to use and when you're going to have paraphernalia, and especially if you're growing. And so these, data essentially confirmed a lot of things that we all know, that a lot of people do believe that there's some definite don'ts, not around police, certainly, not in public settings, not while driving in traffic, not around children, and really, not around people who you just don't know. But what I also like is, they sort of frame some of these things more positively, just about, how to be a good neighbor. And they even quote our friends at the Cannabis Action Network and say, don't do things like have overly loud music or too many freaky parties. Make it so that essentially you respect the rights of others in hopes that they'll be able to respect your rights as well.
Okay. So were there any, what did they find were the sanctions? How does the marijuana community enforce these rules of etiquette? Well,
it's intriguing because some of Craig Reinerman's work, as well as this study from Bruce Johnson's group, have confirmed that some things are as simple as just a scowl or a frown from other users. Sometimes folks who've been using much longer sort of initiate other folks into what the informal rules are, and those often include very direct, information. Hey, we don't do that here. Or, as we might say it, don't bogart that joint.
There we go. So was this a study focusing on people in an urban setting? Did it have to do with festivals? I mean, what's the details here?
So the data were gathered in New York City, and a subset of folks had some really extensive interviews about, generating their own rules, and actually asked about, when are the places that are okay and what are the places that are not okay. And festivals actually came up, and as you can imagine, a large percentage of folks said, no, that's really all right, but that in fact in that very same space when a festival's not going on, it might not be appropriate. One thing that's kind of interesting from a law enforcement perspective is essentially, despite what a lot of law enforcement officers emphasize, the racial differences about public use were not in the directions we would guess. Often you and I have discussed how, more basically folks who are non-white end up getting arrested for possession or public use. In fact, the white folks and the Asians were the ones who seemed to be more willing to use out in public. I don't know if that's necessarily a cause or a result of some of these changes in the legal sanctions and the arrest rates.
Okay. That reminds me of an old routine by Dave Chappelle talking about his white friend and how he talks to the police. And Dave just couldn't believe that somebody would talk that way to the police. So maybe there is something to that. That's kind of interesting. What do you think about, we always talk about the eventual day when America comes to its senses and does some sensible regulations on cannabis, either decriminalization outright or legalization and sales and all that. Do you think ending the punitive measures, the criminal measures on the war on drugs and the war on marijuana would have a significant difference in how people use the substance?
I do think so, and when we think about, sort of the public intox and public open container laws we have for alcohol, I can certainly imagine something comparable for, regulating cannabis use. But also then I feel like we won't have some of these really problematic and expensive things that go on with growing. So, a lot of these folks emphasize that, they don't grow in situations where they're likely to have their plants discovered. And, in fact, when you thumb through High Times or other magazines devoted to the grow culture, you see how much money, time, effort, and really innovation people put into making things, secret and making it so that odors don't escape and things like that. that's got to add to the price of cannabis in the long run, and it would be wonderful to be able to see these kinds of things go by the wayside so that people can really focus on more important issues in their lives.
So they did this study in New York City, or in New York, I guess, and I'm wondering, I mean, they probably don't have the data on this, but we can conjecture on this, how marijuana etiquette may be different in different countries. I mean, obviously it must be vastly different in the Netherlands, but, you know, we're talking about other countries like Britain or New Zealand where there's a significant base of cannabis users and still some fairly punitive laws against that. Do you think there's going to be much cultural difference internationally?
Not in this study, but in Craig Reinerman's data set comparing Amsterdam and San Francisco, found actually that folks with the more lenient laws were more willing to kind of adhere to formal rules about it. We also see across different nations that women are more likely to observe this etiquette more and in more different ways, which I guess shouldn't stun any of the men or the women listening. The other intriguing thing along these lines is just that, well, paraphernalia has a different meaning and presentation under these different circumstances, and I think that some of the innovations in paraphernalia, particularly the use of the vaporizer, may improve in countries that have more lenient enforcement policies about cannabis, and I feel like in the long run, that's going to mean potentially less respiratory harm for the folks who get to use cannabis in those areas.
You know, when I think about this, and I try to envision legalized cannabis, I think a lot about tobacco, and I think about how if you go and watch a movie from the 40s or the 50s or even the early 60s, tobacco smoking seemed pretty, out there. I mean, everybody was doing it. It was in the movies. People are smoking indoors. It just seemed like a natural sort of cultural thing. And over the past, 3 decades or so, we've seen the cultural norms about tobacco change, even though the legality of tobacco hasn't changed that much. I mean, yeah, there's some new laws about you can't smoke in public buildings and such, but I think beyond those new laws, we've just seen a cultural shift in tobacco. Do you see anything like that might be possible with cannabis, either positively or negatively, if it's legalized?
It's curious because a lot of those new tobacco regulations and, just changes in behavior generally have stemmed from the science. So part of why, tobacco smoking isn't so prevalent in films is we have seen some data suggesting that watching people smoking all the time in movies was getting teens to smoke more. I was watching an old noir flick from the 40s, and people were smoking in the hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
elevators, airplanes.
Yeah, and then it's really true that we also have much better assessments of the harms caused by tobacco, and that's what led to some of these changes. Well, now that we know, we've had decades to gather data on the harms caused by cannabis and find it's, really not what sometimes folks have asserted. Perhaps that will change patterns of use and sanctions around it, but I would like to see more credible depictions of marijuana in media like that. Not that I don't appreciate Pineapple Express and the jocular moments as well, but it's always nice to see someone, be a responsible user as a character in one of these things. And we'll sort of see where that takes us. I can imagine public use being essentially discouraged, especially in the initial stages of legalization, and that there, sort of be locations where it would be clearly taboo, more from, social sanctions than anything else. If you see somebody opening a 40-ounce for church, you'd certainly kind of freak out at that,
Yeah.
Even though there isn't necessarily a formal law saying that that's not a possibility.
Okay, and that's what I'm looking forward to, is that we end this criminal prohibition on marijuana, and then it becomes socially sanctioned, and I think we'll have a much better degree of control over it just through socialization than we would through criminalization.
Anytime we try to legislate some of these things that really ought to just be social norms, we run into trouble. We think about the old laws against adultery or crazy things like that really just made things impossible, when they really ought to have been just simple social contracts between people.
Okay. And just briefly speaking about tobacco here, in one of your emails you'd mentioned you have some folks that are desperately trying to quit their tobacco addiction. Any words of advice?
Oh, indeed. I'm grateful to the folks who contacted me and want to encourage them. 2 of the emails in particular suggested that these folks are ready to make a public commitment to start telling other people that they're going to quit cigarette smoking, and I want to give them a big thumbs up because that's the beginning of the action stage. Once your friends know you're not smoking cigarettes anymore, they either freak out and start offering you cigarettes and telling you can't do it, or they start actually learning to quit themselves, or at least stop offering you cigarettes or asking you to go outside with them when they're smoking, and that can really be an important step along the way. My other big plug is about relapse prevention, particularly with tobacco. There's a lot of craving, but craving comes and goes. It's easy to let a crave ride, to sort of let the urge go up and down. It varies just like hunger or anything else, and you don't have to smoke in order to alleviate that craving, particularly once you're past those first 3 days of really serious nicotine withdrawal.
It's the first 3 days that are the hardest, right?
Oh, it's grueling, and I completely understand, but want to let folks know that people do it every day, and they can do it too.
Do people try to use cannabis in an effort to quit tobacco smoking?
There's finally even some research data on that. I clearly, can't recommend it in part because they're just such different substances, and feel like, cannabis can alleviate some of the withdrawal, but usually withdrawal is most severe at times when you need to be at your mental peak, and so cannabis may not be the thing of choice as far as that stuff is concerned. The nicotine replacement therapies are helpful, but not a panacea. And all in all, the chances are, if you can find something to keep yourself busy, to just use that distraction coping, if you will, you'll be surprised at how the minutes go by and suddenly the craving has disappeared too.
Yeah, I would think there'd be a danger also in just the repetitive habit of smoking, and by smoking cannabis you might be just triggering that habit of inhaling smoke into your lungs, and maybe that's not a good idea.
Well, and then getting folks to gradually turn to the vaporizer if they're still cannabis smokers, they'll find they don't have that same feeling inside the throat, and that may be a good opportunity to expose them to a new way of administration and decrease respiratory problems in another way.
That's right. Don't carbonize, vaporize. That's what we like to say. Well, Dr. Mitch, thank you for another illuminating discussion on the etiquette behind marijuana, and we'll remind everyone, puff, puff, pass. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.
It's tough talking to kids about marijuana, especially if you might be a parent who dabbled a time or two in your youth. So to help you out, get your copy of Dr. Mitch Earlywine's latest book, A Parent's Guide to Marijuana. Dr. Earlywine is an associate professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and an expert on the studies concerning marijuana, its effect on health and society, and the methodology behind the statistics. He is a frequent guest here on our daily audio stash. Dr. Earlywine lays it all out without the propaganda and scare tactics that parents know won't work with teenagers. He presents a rational understanding of cannabis, what it is and what it isn't, and why kids shouldn't be using marijuana. You can order today through Amazon.com or check our links at our blog, stash.normal.org. Here at the NORML Daily Audio Stash, we work hard to change our nation's marijuana laws through education and discussion. But we also take time to relax and unwind with an eclectic mix of pod-safe music from many independent artists. We look for music that speaks to the growing truth about cannabis, or music that speaks to broader themes of freedom, liberty, social justice, equality, and protest. To find out more about the artists and download the music you hear on this podcast, just log on to stash.normal.org. And if you'd like to get your music heard by the online cannabis community, just send us an email at stash@normal.org. Here on Hemp Day Hump Day, we get some nice Americana music from Scotland. This band, Dropkick, channels their inner alt country with today's musical hit, Freedom. Think nitty-gritty dirt band in kilts. The music is sweet and easy with fantastic harmonies. They would sound great on any festival stage or in a smoky bar, or a smoky neighborhood coffee shop after the end of Prohibition. If they sound like they've been singing together for a lifetime, note that the band is made up of Alastair Taylor on guitar and vocals and pedal steel and glockenspiel, brother Andrew Taylor on guitar, banjo, vocals, mandolin, drums, and harmonica, cousin Stuart Lowe on bass, and the fortuitously named but unrelated Roy W. Taylor on guitar and vocals. They have 6 albums and an EP out on their own Tailored Records label. Check their website out at dropkickmusic.co.uk or their MySpace page for more information and to purchase their CDs. They offer free postage to anywhere in the world. And of course, you can get those links at our blog at stash.normal.org, where you'll also find an MP3 download link for this song. It's Dropkick with Freedom.
Hi, this is Alan St. Pierre, Executive Director of NORML. We are the oldest, largest, and best-known marijuana law reform organization in America, and it's all because of your support. Take some time to join NORML at www.norml.org. Your membership supports this podcast, our websites, our policy research and analysis, and our annual conferences. Changing marijuana laws is a grassroots effort, and it starts with you, the stakeholder. Join NORML today and add your voice to the millions of cannabis consumers who demand equality with our beer-drinking friends.
We've generated a lot of press on the issue of the Drug Enforcement Administration's 35th birthday the other day, and this year we are in the 72nd year of marijuana prohibition. One of the reporters that has brought this up in the mainstream media works for Reuters, the news agency, and Bernd Debusman is with us. And Bernd, welcome to the Daily Audio Stash.
Thanks for having me.
I caught this on August 6th. You had published a opinion piece called America's Never-Ending Prohibition. What was the main point you were trying to get across to your readers?
Well, just, before we start, I want to make clear that, I'm a columnist. I'm not a reporter.
Oh, okay.
Because I got a lot of email on this story, overwhelmingly positive, and some of the people who emailed me noted that, this ran on Reuters, a mainstream media, and therefore had a particular oomph.
Yeah.
But I am a columnist, and I have exceptional freedom in picking my subjects. My brief is world affairs, and it's what I say is my opinion, and mine alone. And, Reuters is gracious enough to let me voice it.
Well, it's a very good opinion here, too. You noticed, you made the comparison about America's marijuana prohibition experiment, comparing it to the alcohol prohibition experiment of the early 20th century.
Yeah, the thing is, the alcohol prohibition didn't work. It did last for 13 years, but it ended because I think people probably realized it didn't work. And it ran counter to a large majority of Americans, or a majority of Americans who did want to drink. And I think marijuana prohibition is very much in the same league, only it has lasted longer. But it's just, basically it doesn't work.
Right. In the article, in your column, I should say, you also noted the World Health Organization survey that showed that the use of marijuana in the United States is the largest, the greatest rates throughout the world. Why do you suppose that the United States has such a issue with marijuana as compared to some of the other countries, especially Europe or even specifically the Netherlands, where it's more tolerated?
Well, I think there are probably two reasons. I always wonder about, there's a cultural reason involved. And I always wonder about, talking about alcohol for a moment, that young Americans at 18 are deemed mature enough to go and fight and die in a war, but they're not mature enough to go out and buy a six-pack of beer. So the fact that something is forbidden, I think, is attractive. And I think it's, it invites people to try the forbidden thing, particularly since the propaganda on the dire consequences of what can happen if you smoke a joint is so strong.
Right.
But, the whole thing, sometimes, drug policy as such brings to mind a quote which is often attributed to Albert Einstein, and that is, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, which I think has the U.S. succession of U.S. administration have done exactly that.
Exactly. Now, you had mentioned a minute ago that you received a lot of response on this article. Would you say that the response that the American people are coming around on this issue, that maybe the people are way ahead of the politicians on this issue?
Well, I think the people are way ahead of the politicians on this. I must say I was surprised by how overwhelmingly positive the response was. I didn't count the emails, but there was only one that sort of slightly took issue with something, but the others were positive.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good to hear. And another point that you made in the column, which we've got a link to, by the way, up at our blog at stash.normal.org in case anyone wants to read the whole thing. But you made a really good point here about the people who escaped any sort of dependency, disease, or dysfunction, including some of our former presidents, the governor of California, and so on. What do you think is the cause of the disconnect here? I mean, when we look at the statistics, you have someone like Bill Clinton who came into office and famously said, I didn't inhale, but at least he had experience. But a person like Bill Clinton then comes in and triples the number of arrests. Why such hypocrisy amongst our elected officials who have had this personal experience?
Well, and that's not a question I can actually answer. It's a very philosophical one. I'm not sure. I think, I think by and large, politicians do what they think their electorate wants them to say. And I think there is still a very large proportion of Americans who do think that, this is all harmful, and smoking marijuana leads inevitably to harder drugs.
So,
and there's, I'm always surprised as to why the government thinks you can drink in moderation. You can have a couple of beers at a happy hour, but why you cannot smoke responsibly and moderately. This is kind of it's inexplicable to me.
Yeah, that idea that all use is abuse is what I keep saying. Yeah, and looking back also on this, you point out how the popular culture has really embraced this subculture with the new movies that are out, most recently Pineapple Express, The Whackness, Harold and Kumar, and so on. I wonder, maybe I could get your thoughts on this. If it's a case of where most people think that it's okay, but they don't think that other people think that it's okay. Maybe some sort of collective mindset like that. Any idea? Do you have any ideas on that idea?
Yeah, well, I really do think it's the effect of we have 7 decades of propaganda, and I think a large number of people are still influenced by it. I'm kind of surprised there's sort of a parallel universes exist here. There's people who read High Times and, buy all the products that are advertised therein, and they go to see stoner movies. And obviously there's quite a number of them. And then you have this other parallel universe where all this doesn't exist.
Yeah. Did you get a lot of pushback or controversy from your editors there at Reuters?
No, I don't. This is I'm in a very privileged position that I can pick and choose my subjects, and no, there was no pushback whatsoever.
Oh, that's excellent. That's so good to hear. That the one of the problems that we have in this movement is just the lack of talking about the issue. I reported on a story up in Seattle where they made a very mainstream video with travel author Rick Steves, who's famous for all his European travel videos. And it was just a simple 30-minute infomercial having a conversation about marijuana policy. And the mainstream stations, the 3 big network stations up there in Seattle, refused to run it in any sort of good time slot. So we really appreciate that you'd get this message out in a mainstream publication or a mainstream news service so that more people can learn the truth about this marijuana. So thank you for doing that. Is this something you plan on, maybe revisiting in some time?
Yeah, well, I've written about drugs, and this is a drug policy on and off for more than 35 years, i.e. drug policy as in eradication and, visiting Latin America and Asia. But I haven't actually written anything about marijuana laws here. This is the first. And I think I will revisit the subject because, some of my emails gave me fresh material. There was one emailer who wanted to talk to me on the phone, and I gave him my phone, and he related this incident he suffered himself, which was that he was stopped by the police, and his car was searched, and they found a small amount of marijuana. So they arrested him, and while this process was underway, according to him, I have no way of proving this. While this was underway, he heard on the police radio that there was an armed robbery in progress about 3 blocks from where he was being arrested. And the cops didn't go to the place where the armed robbery was taking place, but they booked him instead.
Wow.
Which shows to me that, I pointed out in that article, in that column, that I think, this is an enormous expenditure for something that is behavior. It's the war on drugs is really a war on behavior.
Yeah. Well, it's again, the article is out there on our blog at stash.normal.org. You can find the link. It's called America's Never-Ending Prohibition by Bernd de Busemann. And Bernd, Dankeschön and auf Wiederhören.
Auf Wiederhören.
Thank you so much, and giving me a chance to put my high school German to use. I appreciate it.
All right, you're most welcome. Okay.
Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. And you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.normal.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave you today with another one of our cannabis quotes. This one comes from a study done by Kaiser Permanente in 1997. Quote, "Relatively few adverse clinical effects from the chronic use of marijuana have been documented in humans. However, the criminalization of marijuana use may itself be a health hazard, since it may expose the users to violence and criminal activity." End quote. Like I always say, marijuana is not the problem. Marijuana prohibition is the problem. Didn't we learn anything from the early 20th century prohibition of alcohol? It doesn't work. It just creates criminals. I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us here on The Stash, and make sure to tune in tomorrow for another set of news and interviews you can use for the cannabis community. And I'll be busy getting ready for HempFest. I hope to see you all there. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.